and welcome to Leadership PRN, the Faculty of Medicine's podcast on leadership in medicine. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton, and I'm the Director of Faculty Development. Today, I'm very pleased to have with us Dr. Anurag Saxena from University of Saskatchewan. Welcome, Anurag.
Hi, good morning.
Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your role at University of Saskatchewan?
Certainly. Currently, most of my time is spent in my administrative role, which is the Associate Dean Postgrad Medical Education. And I've been at it for about 10 years or so at this time. That takes about 70% of my time. In addition to that, I do about 20% clinical service, which is in pathology. So I'm a full professor here in that department. And then the remaining time, which is left, about 10%, is split between teaching and research. And research is the one which I find most energy giving. So that's what it looks like for me at this time. And because of the role I have, I've also got additional responsibilities and opportunities through Royal College and Leeds Global and other places.
And that's, I think, how you and I met, was through some of the work you've done with national organizations, the Royal College and so on.
Yes, indeed. Actually, I very fondly recall the opportunity to work with you on the paper on power we had done, and also the module on time and energy management. And the TISLEP work together. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been great actually to work with you, and we've presented together at conferences. So I know that you have an academic interest in leadership, and I think that's one of the things that is often missing when we're talking about developing leadership programming. We don't always think about, what is the evidence? What are some of the theories? And I know that that's something that I understand is of interest to you. And I'm just wondering, how did that come about for you? How did you get interested in sort of the theory and scholarship of leadership?
This is a bit of a long journey for me. Before I took on the role as the postgrad dean at the university here, I was a full professor, and I had a grant from CIHR and also from Heart and Stroke Foundation. Then I got pulled into this role. I'm very grateful for those opportunities and the mentors who made it possible. But then I thought that if I'm going to do this job well, then I really should acquire additional capabilities. So towards that, I ended up doing a master's in education and an MBA. And given the academic slant of my previous life, I ended up doing 2 theses, so one for each of these degrees, and both were on leadership. And then I think it was just a question of switch from hard science research to research into leadership and social sciences and education. So that's how it started at that point in time. And then gradually, once you start thinking more about it, especially, if you're academically curious in these things, then the questions keep unfolding. It took me quite a bit of a time, Laura, to get to a place where I could find my own, how shall I say this, niche, or the questions that really spoke to me. And I think doing this job actually really quite helped. Because, that practitioner academic straddling, you're doing this on a daily basis, but then you also have time to think about this, really helped me. So I think over the last 10 years or so, it has evolved into, what to research, how to research, and finding questions, that would be, at least to me personally, would be worthy of pursuit.
So it sounds like you had a bent towards research in your first part of your career, a clinical research focus maybe, and then, or basic science, and then it evolved as you became more involved in the leadership roles. Is that the process? What it was?
That's correct. Yes. So I think it's just the academic slant and the research orientation continued. The fields just shifted. I still dabble a little bit through collaborations with other people in the hard science research, but it's so difficult to find time to do justice to everything. Yeah.
How do you find research in these 2 areas different or similar? The previous research you did and what you do now. Is there a connection?
Oh, that's a great question. It took me quite a bit of a time to seriously appreciate the rigor in qualitative research. And I think in my past life, it was mostly so to speak, the positivist paradigm for research and, evidence and objectivity and hard data and mostly a quantitative bent. But then when I moved into leadership research, it was mostly qualitative and immersive. Uh, I still remember one of the analogies someone had told me is that if you want to study a river, you can stay on the ground and look at it and measure everything you want to do, which would be like the hard science research. Or you can actually step into the river and feel it and immerse yourself. That will be qualitative research. So that paradigm actually spoke to me. But I must admit, it took me years to truly appreciate the rigor in qualitative research uh, and even come to like believe in it. So I think that's been a long journey.
I think I've heard other people in medicine describe something similar, the shift from a sort of positivist view to something a bit more constructivist or theory informed. Yeah.
Right. Having said that, I think, a lot of research on the hard science side of things or in healthcare systems and all, that also is, embracing more of the qualitative paradigms.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can I ask what your thesis were on?
Yes, yes. So the thesis for Masters in Education was on leadership in medical education. And the thesis well, actually, they called it dissertation for MBA was dyad leadership in healthcare.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And is that still what you're studying, or has it sort of moved on from those topics?
Right. So dyad leadership is still an important thing for me. We did have a couple of papers on that. A few more are still in the works here. On the education side of things, again, these kind of things, they evolve over a period of time. So for me initially it was like, what is it that is easy to do and, finish and get some answers to those questions. Over a period of time, it has evolved more into, at least for me, is what I would call a programmatic approach to research and leadership. So there's a spectrum there from leadership development and various aspects of that to the capabilities of leaders, to some of the models of leadership we have, and finally to the practice and of leadership. So I think those are the areas where I'm currently not focused because it's a big spectrum there, but still dabble in some areas where it makes intuitive sense to me to move from one to the other aspect.
What are some of the pressing questions about leadership that you think that we as a field should be exploring as academic physicians?
Right. So before I say something to that, I must say that I'm truly, truly, truly thankful for the job I have currently because it allows me to see things how they are unfolding in the healthcare and in the medical education field, but then also have a little bit of an academic questioning of those things. So there are quite a few things which actually I could speak to, but I think I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 very shortly, or very briefly, I mean. So first thing for me has to do with this concept of leader identity. Because as physicians, we do have a professional identity, which some would say is different from a leader identity. And then how do you get to that place? And then how that translates into the behaviors you exhibit at the workplace or you indulge in. I mean, there's a lot of literature out there which draws upon the similarities and differences in a physician identity and a leader identity. I personally believe that there are differences, but then how these two come into play when you are, either in formal or informal positions in the healthcare and medical education system. So I think that's one question we need to answer at a theoretical basis. The second thing has to do around leadership development. I think it is still a nascent and an evolving field of research, so to speak. I mean, there are traditional methods for leadership development which we use in medicine. But given the inherently aspirational nature of leadership, I think there are things we could be exploring around, like, what is the motivation of people to lead? How do we get them to do the right things? And And that to me is extremely important at this point in time where there are so much instability and divides in the narratives in the world. So the third thing, I think the third thing actually flows from this is that, the pandemic actually brought this into stark focus for us is this this convergence and confluence of social and medical and political leadership together and, affecting populations massively in a very short period of time. And some of the things which some people would question, I don't, but some people would question. So I think, how do we study that? What does this look like? Is this the way it's going to be, or can we take this forward? The other thing for me is, when we look at the LEADS framework for leadership, the one which has been developed by Graham Dixon and widely adopted in Canada. So I feel that a lot of emphasis is done on the achieve results portion of that thing. And that is true because, leaders, you cannot just simply be inspiring all the time. You got to get the results achieved in a timely manner. So I feel that there's a lot of focus on achieve results. And towards that, there is engage others. Those things are kind of really heavily focused on. I feel some research could be really done into the other two domains, which is develop coalitions and system transformation. We do see some work in those areas, but even the word transformation, is widely, variably understood. So I think that's another thing we could do, especially when we talk about the directions we are going in. So, this integrated healthcare this concept has been around, and we've been around the block many times. But how come that, despite intense focus on that, we are still falling short of what we should be doing? So what is it that the leadership actually is doing or not doing to get us to that place? And because this is a recurring, long-standing issue, I think that should be studied. And again, as we move towards competency-based medical education, I think Canada has been at the forefront of implementing this through both the Royal College and the College of Family Physicians. So I think there are differences in how the two things were done. So I think that's another area as to what is the role of leadership in trying to move these forward. So I think again, you can see that my personal, attraction for me is a systems level thinking of what the leadership can do, right, at the governance, at the policy, at the strategy level. So those are some of the things I think we could be looking at, and I think which are there in front of us. And this ties into not just studying these things, but also some thinking around thought leadership on leadership. What is it that we should be thinking of? And obviously, lots of brilliant minds in the country and the world, they could be put together, and a forum could be created to say, hey, where should this all be headed?
That's an interesting phrase, thought leadership on leadership. Do you want to expand on that a little?
Yes. So when we look at the field of leadership in medicine and healthcare and education, it is especially when we look at it from the research lens. There is this scholarly approach to leadership education, and obviously, that ties into one things you were mentioning earlier, Lara, is the level of evidence. What is the evidence we are using to inform how do we train leaders? And although there have been a few meta-analyses, there are systemic, it's the same thing, the reviews which are out there. There are lots of scoping reviews on the practices and things like that. But I think the same degree of rigor could also be applied to leadership studies and evaluate them and see how they could then be used to inform the practices for leadership development. So that's one thing, which I really care about is what is the quality of evidence supporting that. And we could get into some of the controversial and provocative things, but let's not do that right now. And the second thing then is the scholarship of leadership itself, right? So which is I am personally quite enamored with, if you do things, you should evaluate from a continuous quality improvement perspective. But then there are also other things, what are the real questions in leadership that should be explored? So I think balancing both of those things as to what we do and what we should be researching are actually two different things. And then, of course, this is third thing is about the thought leadership on leadership is what is truly important at this point in time, given that we are, the world is in a very different place, compared to maybe even 10, 20 years ago. Uh, some people would say that we are in a post-truth era. There is this globalization efforts going on. There is this divide between different narratives, so to speak. So what is the job of the leaders at this point in time? What should they be doing? Uh, there these the right emphasis on equity, diversity, inclusion. How do we move this forward? Is it only going to be like sprinkling of things and hope that someday it'll all come together, or what do we do? How do we bring people together? Because some of the initiatives sometimes organizations take, they may actually make people a little bit defensive and not be open. So I don't think that's the intent. So I think these are some of the deeper questions for leaders, and so that's what I meant by thought leadership is that not opposing, but engaging in a constructive dialogue on how do we make meaningful progress in these areas while keeping everyone engaged in this. So that's one thing I was referring to.
Where do you see the study of leadership taking us in the next decade?
So a couple of things here. I think at least in medicine and in healthcare, one of the things I mentioned earlier will continue because that's how most people get into leadership research, which is evaluation of what they do. So that I think is going to continue. That's important for people who you wish to engage in this area. The second thing from me is I think, both of us know that leadership actually is a social construct, right? So as the societies evolve, I think there are going to be changing conceptions and narratives on leadership as to what this looks like. The three components, the leaders and the process of leadership and the constituents, irrespective of the words we use, that dynamic will always remain. I think there is an increasing awareness and understanding that context is not just a unilateral influence on leadership, because the exercise of leadership itself changes not just the dynamic between the followers, for want of a better word, and the constituents and the leaders, but also the influence on the context, which also gets changed. So I think I think I've seen some things around what is the bidirectional impact of leadership and context. So I think that's one thing I feel that's going to be studied a bit more. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that what does actually leadership look like in this new evolving post-truth era, where everybody defines their own reality in whatever way they see. And as long as there are going to be institutions, and I think there will be institutions, which will, so the need for leadership will always be there. It cannot just be, how shall I say it? It cannot just be a simple network of a few people. If the society was organized only as small networks, then I suppose, people could work. But it's, as long as they're going to be bigger institutions, there will be always hierarchy. There will always be power, and there'll be a need to study leadership. Now, the third thing I wanted to say is that some of the future trends, where we are going, which is a combination of humanize and futurize. The rapid pace of innovations. What do we do? How do we actually marry together the innovations that are happening versus providing stability in the organizations and still pushing them forward? I think those are some of the other things that need to be studied. And I think given some of the changing nature of work, the hybrid work, the remote work, the incorporation of artificial intelligence into the practice of medicine, this is all going to change how do we do the work. And physician engagement is even currently a problem. So I think, what does that look like, in this changed atmosphere? And the other thing which really speaks to me is how do we hold our leaders accountable at the same time being kind to them? So I think that is one thing which really speaks to me personally quite a lot, that we don't want to be blindly following them, especially when we are following them on the path we all believe in, because, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I think there has to be something studied about how do we simultaneously be kind and hold them accountable. So these are some of my thoughts. And
there's so many interesting topics. I feel like I'd like to have you back. Maybe I will have you back for a series and we can delve into some of these. I mean, the point about physician engagement, I think that's such a good one. There's, as systems seem to be getting more complex and more demands, it feels like there's even a pulling back from engagement on a lot of physicians' parts. So I really want to thank you for joining us today, Anurag, and maybe, like I said, maybe we'll have you back at some point.
Oh, thank you, Lara. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate this. And I've always enjoyed working with you and look forward to that. So thank you.
And that's another episode of Leadership PRN. Thank you to all of our listeners. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover or somebody you'd like me to speak with on the podcast, please let me know. You can reach me at lara.hazelton@nshealth.ca or lara.hazelton@dal.ca. Until next time, take care.